2 years into our marriage, I still thought of us as newlyweds. After the day we promised each other forever, my heart dropped when I heard my wife say, "I am pregnant. The father is my boss, Blas. We should wait to have kids." I wanted to enjoy our time as newlyweds. The words I had once said to her on our wedding day echoed painfully in my mind. My name is Kitchener, and I turned 30 this year. I married Susan 2 years ago after meeting her at work. Although we worked in different departments, I often found myself captivated by her beauty whenever our paths crossed in the office hallways or elevator. When a coworker introduced us, I was thrilled and felt like I'd won a small victory. Determined not to miss my chance, I eagerly sought opportunities to talk to her, devouring every book and movie she recommended. Slowly but surely, my efforts paid off. Back then, Susan had a boyfriend, though I never delved into details. I brushed it off, convinced that my persistence would eventually win her over. It's astonishing to me now how determined I was. Susan eventually left her job to become a stay-at-home wife. I was relieved that she was home and keeping our house in order. She attended cooking and flower arrangement classes, enjoyed leisurely lunches with friends, and led a relaxed life. As our second anniversary approached and our parents began hinting about grandchildren, an unimaginable incident unfolded. After a busy period of overtime, I was in high spirits, leaving work on time. Anticipating that Susan might have felt lonely due to my hectic schedule, I bought her favorite cake on the way home. With the long weekend ahead, I had planned a mini vacation for us. I picked up brochures from a travel agency and ordered takeout so Susan wouldn't have to cook. I managed to get off work early, eager to surprise her. As I removed my shoes at the front door and called out to Susan, she hurried down the hallway, clearly surprised by my early return. I explained that I'd ordered takeout for dinner and handed her the cake she loves. But something seemed off about her. "Is something wrong?" I asked, passing her my suit jacket. She nodded slightly, a somber expression on her face. I settled onto the living room couch, and Susan took a seat across from me. Then she spoke words I never imagined I'd hear. "I'm pregnant, and I want us to break up." Her words struck me like a heavy blow. I couldn't fathom hearing such a thing from Susan. We had been careful to wait before having children, as she had insisted that it was too soon after we married. I had respected her wishes and promised to wait, so the news of this new life inside her was both shocking and disheartening. "I want a divorce. It's for the child." Hearing Susan use the phrase "for the child" in this context was wrenching. I had always imagined us using it to celebrate together, not under these circumstances. Susan's face was expressionless, but her resolve was clear. "Please sign these," she said, laying out divorce papers with her signature already on them. Her parents had signed as witnesses. It was evident she had already consulted them. I wanted to know who the father was, but I couldn't let my emotions show. My pride was on the line. "So, you're serious?" I asked, and Susan nodded firmly in response. After signing the divorce papers, I focused intently on keeping my hands steady as I signed. Susan folded the papers carefully and, seeming to have packed her things, picked up a large suitcase. Without a word, she made her way to the door, not once looking back. Her indifference was palpable, and it was clear that her feelings for me had vanished. As she disappeared into the twilight, dragging her suitcase behind her, I could only watch her retreating figure. That night, I drank heavily until I passed out on the living room floor. When I woke, I was met with the symptoms of a cold, headache, and chills that felt different from a typical hangover. I called in sick to work, my mind still reeling from the previous night's events. In the quiet aftermath, I questioned whether it had all been a nightmare, but the liquor bottle and pen on the living room table proved it was real. Susan had truly betrayed me and left. The realization hit hard, and the saying "the cuter they are, the harder they fall" rang painfully true. I found myself hating Susan, who I had once loved so deeply. My next thought was to find out who the other man was. I spent the day sifting through Susan's belongings in a futile search for clues. Among the items, I found the ring and bracelet I had given her during our courtship, still in their jewelry case. But the wedding ring was discarded in the trash, a thought that made me feel dizzy. My search for evidence of the other man only succeeded in raising my fever. Despite my state, I couldn't stop myself from rummaging through her things, feeling as if I would fall apart if I stopped. My obsession with finding answers left me so unwell that I ended up taking a full week off from work. When I finally returned to work, I was surprised to find that my coworkers already knew about my divorce despite my silence on the matter. "How are you feeling, Ryan?" Getting sick over a divorce? Typical, my direct boss, Tom, Gary said with a smirk. Gary had always been a thorn in my side, his pretentious and sleazy behavior making him difficult to endure. As I begrudgingly tolerated his presence, I realized he was referring to my divorce. The connection struck me. Susan and Gary had worked together in the same department before she married me. Oh, didn't Susan mention the divorce to you? Or was your tiny little pride too precious for that? Gary taunted. The pieces fell into place. Are you the father of Susan's unborn child? I asked through gritted teeth. Gary's smirk widened as he confirmed. That's right. His mocking tone made it clear he was enjoying my distress. In a moment of rage, I acted on impulse. When I came to my senses, I found Gary sprawled on the floor, surrounded by a toppled chair and scattered desk items. My fists ached with a dull pain. The chaos that ensued was frenetic. Some colleagues were helping Gary up, while others tried to restrain me. Gary, despite being hit, laughed, reveling in the trouble I had just invited. He had baited me into this confrontation. Gary was the grandson of the company's founder, and I had just assaulted a future executive. Naturally, I was suspended and then fired. Now, I was unemployed and dealing with the aftermath of my divorce. My life felt like a wreck, and while I knew I needed to find a new job to survive, my actions seemed to perpetually lag behind my thoughts. I started drinking during the day, and as night fell, I would drink again. I suppose this is what they call self-destructive behavior. I had lost all motivation and took solace in the fact that I had some savings. I wanted to thank my past self for being diligent about saving money while living through these difficult times. After about a month of this routine, a surprising visitor arrived. Initially, I pretended not to be home, but after 30 minutes, the doorbell rang again. Once more, I ignored it. An hour later, the doorbell rang again. Annoyed, I wondered who could be persistently bothering me. Reluctantly, I opened the front door to find an unfamiliar woman standing there. She was tall, with a piercing gaze that made me feel as though I was being scrutinized. I quickly averted my eyes, feeling self-conscious about the alcohol on my breath and my unshaven face. May I ask your name? I inquired, trying to regain my composure. The woman's dignified appearance and strong-willed face made me feel even more embarrassed. Are you the ex-husband of that woman? She asked bluntly, nearly stopping my heart. Her directness was unsettling. It became clear that she was Gary's wife, and the woman she referred to must have been Susan. Well, I stammered, caught off guard. The woman, introducing herself as Lillian, gave a deep bow. As I had suspected, she was indeed Gary's wife. Meanwhile, neighborhood ladies passed by, casting curious glances. I always found these gossip-loving folks to be a bit challenging to deal with. Please come in, I said hastily, eager to avoid the gossip that would surely follow. Otherwise, thank you, she replied, stepping inside without hesitation. My home was a mess, having gone untouched in my state of disarray. As she entered the chaotic living room, she began to silently tidy up the trash scattered around. I can clean that up myself, I protested, but she cut me off sharply. We can't have a serious conversation in this mess, can we? If you're not going to help, then please sit down, she said. I complied, sitting upright on the couch and watching in silence as she cleaned. Why don't you go wash your face, she suggested. Her words startled me, and I hurried to the bathroom. Looking in the mirror, I was shocked at my own reflection. I looked like a stranger. I washed my face, shaved, and combed my hair for the first time in ages, feeling a bit more like myself. When I returned to the living room, everything was clean. The trash had been bagged and placed in the hallway. I used your kitchen, Lillian said as she handed me a cup of tea. Her competence was evident, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Thank you. I feel like a human again, I said, surprised at how naturally my gratitude flowed. Lillian offered a faint smile in response, but it faded almost immediately. My husband asked me for a divorce. He said it's because he has a child now, Lillian stated bluntly. She seemed to have no patience for beating around the bush, which mirrored the directness with which Susan had approached me. I'm already divorced, I replied, trying to distance myself from the issue. It's none of my business anymore. From Lillian's tone, it was evident she still had feelings for Gary and was intent on getting rid of Susan. She looked somewhat startled when I questioned whether she still wanted to be married to Gary. Her expression suggested that divorce hadn't even been a consideration for her. Do you really think you can start over from this point? I asked, my curiosity getting the better of me. Her reactions intrigued me. With a small smile, she simply said, "We're married, after all." Her response left me feeling oddly defeated. I decided to ask Lillian to leave for the day, agreeing to discuss things further another time. The day after Lillian's visit, Gary showed up at my door. It seemed he had heard about his wife's visit from Lillian. As my former boss, I invited him into the living room. Gary looked around, took in the dessert, and then laughed. "Find something funny?" I asked, trying to mask my irritation. "Lillian cleaned up, didn't she?" Gary responded with a hint of amusement in his voice. It was clear that Lillian's meticulous touch was evident in the tidiness of the room. The subtle connection between them irritated me. I asked Gary why he had come. He explained he had a request. He wanted me to persuade Lillian to divorce him. His words shocked me. Gary revealed that Lillian couldn't have children, and he desired an heir. With Susan being pregnant, Gary saw it as a perfect opportunity. He offered me a thick envelope as a reward for convincing Lillian to agree to the divorce. The thought of him trying to resolve everything with money made me feel sick. "I want kids, and that's something Lillian can't give me," Gary said. His blatant disregard for Lillian's feelings pushed me to the edge. I grabbed him by the collar, but he just laughed, probably underestimating my resolve. Just as I was about to swing at him, a gentle hand wrapped around my raised fist. "Is my husband worth punching?" Lillian said softly, having followed Gary. She chided me for leaving the front door open. I hesitated, feeling my anger deflate. I muttered, "Okay," and let go of Gary's collar. "So you want a child, huh?" Lillian said, her gaze fixed on Gary. He nodded in response. With a composed gesture, she pulled out divorce papers from her bag and handed them to him. "Are you satisfied now?" she asked with a smile that was both stunning and unsettling. It seemed capable of both forgiveness and condemnation. As Gary took the divorce papers, his fingers brushed against the back of Lillian's hand. There was something hauntingly familiar about the gesture. "I shouldn't have," I muttered, quickly averting my gaze. "Thank you," Gary said curtly, then hurried out the front door. As he left, he tossed over his shoulder, "We're enemies now, aren't we?" His acceptance of her declaration of war was palpable. Once Gary was gone, Lillian turned to me. "Shall we lick our wounds together? But first, let's get our revenge." We agreed to demand compensation from both Gary and Susan. Given their wealth, I was confident they'd pay whatever we demanded. I instructed my lawyer to handle everything simultaneously. It was a small act of retribution, but it was something. After our demands were made, Susan finally came to me, distraught. It turned out that while Gary would cover his share, he refused to cover Susan's portion. Their not being married yet made it a complicated situation. During a meeting with all four of us, Gary claimed that I was also at fault for Susan's affair. He said my constant work had made her feel neglected and led to her infidelity. "You've got quite the knack for spitting lies, don't you?" Lillian retorted, producing a report from a personal investigation into Gary's background. It had been commissioned by Gary's parents. The report revealed that Susan and Gary had been involved before my marriage. Susan had taken a settlement to cut ties with Gary, but their relationship continued behind the scenes. My marriage to Susan had been orchestrated by Gary as a cover-up. "I love my work, and I can be a bit insensitive," I said. For them, having an insensitive husband was quite convenient. Plus, since I worked with Gary, they could keep tabs on me easily. The report compiled by Gary's parents was shockingly thorough, thanks to their considerable investment. Lillian read it aloud with an unwavering tone, draining the color from Gary and Susan's faces. Susan was the first to crack, her distress escalating into near hysteria. Stop it now. It's harmful for the baby if you're so stressed out." Susan screamed, her voice high-pitched and frantic. At Lillian's cold glare, Susan flinched and then collapsed, fainting on the spot. Gary rushed to her side, cradling her in panic. Lillian simply smiled at the scene. "Already giving up? How disappointing. I truly believe I love Gary. They say love and hate are two sides of the same coin. The deeper the love, the deeper the hate." Gary seemed to grasp that sentiment. In the end, I had little say in the matter, and the meeting concluded with Lillian clearly in control. As the meeting wrapped up, Lillian looked at me and laughed, saying, "That's it." Afterward, word of my divorce spread through the office. I was the one who leaked it to my coworkers. The company tried to suppress the news, but it was too late. Gary was sidelined at work and found himself without a place in his own family. Susan, having remarried, faced legal troubles of her own. It seems Gary's parents, who favored Lillian, were now treating Susan poorly after she had displaced Lillian. It felt just. Once everything about alimony and other issues was settled, I invited Lillian for coffee. She shared that she was working at a friend's company and living alone. I can't have children, so I need to be self-sufficient, she explained. I no longer felt the fear I once did. Seeing Lillian speak with such sincerity made me question whether her reasons for being independent were quite as straightforward as they seemed. I disagree, I said firmly. Lillian looked up, clearly taken aback. It was the first time I had expressed such a strong opinion. I noticed she was still wearing her wedding ring, a sign that she hadn't entirely let go of Gary. Gathering my resolve, I decided to share the words I had been rehearsing since the previous night. I don't mind, I continued. Her puzzled expression deepened. I took a deep breath and asked her to wait while I found a job, as I was applying to be her boyfriend. Lillian and I will definitely make it work. We understand each other's pain. I promise I will never hurt you. From my serious tone, she seemed to realize I wasn't joking. She looked down briefly and then chuckled softly. I'm quite a handful, you know, she said with a touch of humor. I'm well aware of that, I replied, tracing the back of her hand with my finger. She seemed lost in thought as she squinted her eyes, then gently brushed my finger away. Slowly, she removed her wedding ring, which felt like a symbolic gesture of moving on from her past. She lightly touched my hand, her delicate fingers tracing the back of mine, conveying a silent promise of her affection. I'll make you happy, so please wait, Lillian said with a joyful laugh, as if her heart were overflowing with happiness. I vowed silently to always protect that smile. What did you think? Subscribing to the channel. That helps us create more. See you in the next video.